have to do something with that first.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Frances Jo Hamilton. I'm the Director of Revitalization with Heritage Ohio, and I'd like to welcome everyone to today's online discussion. These discussions are brought to you as a membership benefit of Heritage Ohio. Heritage Ohio's mission is to help people to save the places that matter, build community, and live better. Today we'll have a presentation by Christie Borkan on change and tradition in downtown Main Streets. We will take questions throughout the presentation, and at the end of the presentation, please remain muted throughout the presentation and type any questions that you have into the chat box. So if you hover over the bottom of your screen, you'll see a little chat icon pop up. You can type any question or comment that you have into the chat box, and then I will feed those questions. Enter. Our presentations will be uploaded by tomorrow to our YouTube channel. If you go to YouTube, you can search Heritage Ohio and locate this and other recorded sessions. As I said, today our presenter is Christie Borkan, and she's here to discuss with us change and tradition in downtown Main Streets in Ohio. With this, I'm going to hand it over to Christie. Christie, thank you so much for being with us today.
You're welcome. It's nice to see different faces on Zoom. I'm in Zooms all day long with my job at Case Western Reserve, and they're not nearly as interesting as this. So hopefully you will all enjoy it too. My talk today is going to focus on the central development of towns in the Western Reserve of Ohio mostly. We'll be looking at the history of Wellington's downtown commercial development as seen through its architecture, comparing it along the way with other small towns in the Western Reserve. Larger cities tend to have more renovation and change in a rapid time period, so it's more difficult to get a good snapshot of what a place would look like at any particular point. So I tend to focus more on the smaller towns. Wellington was settled by New England immigrants in the first quarter of the 19th century, which mirrors the migration pattern of most of the Western Reserve. The towns being founded were small, and the more ambitious founders were setting up the amenities that would help attract more settlers. There, wouldn't move for me. The earliest public buildings were multi-purpose village meeting halls, which served as government, church, and social venues. By the 1830s and 40s, most towns had built separate buildings for the town government, which by then included law enforcement and fire station, and usually at least 2 churches, Presbyterian, Congregational, Baptist, and Methodist being the most common. I'm showing you on the screen a painting from 1857 by Archibald Willard, and a photograph that I took over Memorial Day weekend, standing in the same spot, capturing hopefully the same, you'll maybe recognize some of the buildings, like in the right-hand corner. Can you see my pointer? Okay, the right-hand building is the Couch House, where he had a furniture factory behind it. And so the town hall is about in here where you see the brick, and that stands where this church was. So we're sort of looking at the same view, but lots bigger trees later. If we look at some of the early maps, we can see the layout of some of these towns. They were building schools, stagecoach inns and taverns, general stores, all centered around a common square at the main crossroads of the town. Early agricultural towns set aside usually a grazing area, and most of the time it was fenced, so that when farmers brought their livestock to market to sell it, they had a place to pen it up. And so that village green becomes an important piece of any downtown area. And obviously the commercial district or the commercial center of these towns was usually in the middle, so that it was equidistant for people to come to it. So what I'm showing you here on the Wyndham Center map, I blew this way up so that you could see. If you look at the left-hand one, the railroad comes in down here at the bottom, but the original crossroads is up higher. So then I blew up the crossroads so that you could see how they were labeling things. You know, a lot of these are residences really close to downtown, but then you'll see things like up here, north on the North Road, there's the Methodist Church, the Congregational Church, the Town Hall, and a chapel. So I thought it was interesting that there's a chapel, and I don't know if that was, it's not a big Catholic area. This is in Portage County. So I don't know if that was a Catholic chapel or a non-denominational chapel. It seems odd that you would have a chapel as well as two churches. Unusual for this time period. But then when you look at the center here, you see a store on 2 of the 4 corners. And then if you come down this main road toward the railroad, you also see a store right beside the railroad, and one, there's one just to the north of this too that I cut off. You also see over here a wagon shop. Here's the parsonage. So it's nice that they will label sometimes like what is going on in those. Here's the blacksmith shop over here. They'll label what the usage was for those particular buildings. Keep in mind too that often during this time period in the first half of the 19th century, the people were often living in the same building where they worked. So they might have like a harness shop in the back barn behind their house, or they might have a general store on the first floor and live upstairs. So different combinations, but many of the businesses were owner occupied. Here I'm showing you a couple of other Portage County maps to show you the different layouts. So here in Hiram Center, we have a crossroads. And again, you see a college just north on the north spoke, and a church. The Methodist Church was there. Actually, this is mislabeled because the church at the corner is Disciples of Christ Church, and the Methodist Church was the one closest to the college. And the school is over here. And Hiram had no village green, which is interesting because it's an agrarian town. Nelson Center is just 7 miles down the road. It had a public square with a green in the middle that was fenced for livestock, and the 4 spokes of the road coming around it. So now that road is a traffic circle going around that. They retained the public square. And you can see on this one, the Methodist Church, the Con Church. Here's the academy, which became the local school. I don't think their parsonage is out here, but they're not labeling anything else. Oh, here, turning mill. So again, you know, trying to center their commercial district around the center of town. So if we look at some of our village greens that as they developed that we can still see today, in various towns. Here you see Norwalk in Huron County with a late 19th century map of the center of town. So this is the main crossroads. And here is the main crossroads again. So that church that you can see is right there. And it has still retained, you can see the trees here, it's still retained a village square. Here is Hudson in Summit County. If you haven't been there, it's a wonderfully preserved Greek revival town, but also has a business district that has become more Victorianized, but still has its large village green. And it was in a more elongated, it's not a little square like just a quarter acre. It is probably a couple of acres large. There's a gazebo down here at the end, at one end, a bell tower at the other end, and the commercial district along it. So instead of being in the center of Hudson, having the business district and that village green be in the center, it is on one quadrant of the main crossroads. Here's a picture of the village green in Chardon, which is the county seat for Geauga County. And whenever I put the counties on here, I note if it's a county seat, because to me, that makes a big difference in the commercial life of the city. It means that there were more businesses because there was more traffic to support. But it also means in terms of layout, they needed more public space, because usually a county seat has a town hall and city government buildings, as well as the county courthouse, and jail is usually incorporated into that. So we end up oftentimes with a larger green because there are more public buildings to go around it, and more elaborateness to the city center. Chardon has the courthouse in a city circle, like a traffic circle driving around. And then this long park goes along the one of the spokes of the cross, the layout of the town. Often, in the later 19th century, bandstands or gazebos were added as a centerpiece for public social gatherings in these village greens. So in other words, they didn't often get rid of the village green space. They kept the space even long after the usefulness of it as a livestock pen was gone. So I put a few examples of some of the village greens. Here's Medina's gazebo, Litchfield in Medina County's gazebo, Chardon's gazebo, and Hudson's gazebo that you couldn't see in the other view of the park. And Twinsburg, you can see the church along one side. This park does not have a gazebo. Instead, it has a stone bandstand, so just a level platform. And of course, here is Wellington's Village Park, since it's the main focus of my talk today, but I like comparing it with other similar towns across the Western Reserve. This is the Village Town Hall, which is the centerpiece of the Village Park, and a modern gazebo that's been built in a different location than the original gazebo was. When pavement replaced dirt roads to help with increased wagon traffic, divergent styles appeared for the village green. Some towns adopted the central circle of grass, often fenced in, but later, especially if it was metal fencing, those fences all went away in the war, metal drives. But increasingly, they began to be used for memorial picnic spaces, of course, and in memorials for different war heroes. Usually the buildings, the schools, churches, town halls, commercial buildings were usually on the outside of the traffic circle. So here you see Litchfield, Ohio, with a green space. It's got picnic benches, it's got a war memorial in it, and a gazebo, which we saw before. And then all the commercial buildings are around it in this traffic circle. In Talmadge, they also have a beautiful traffic circle with 8 spokes coming out of it. And as you're on this traffic circle, it's very interesting, you know, as you get to each one of the 8 spokes, it's north, northeast, east, southeast, south. So you actually are very aware growing up in a town like Talmadge where the directions are on a compass. Talmadge has this unique circle in it because it's got the first school building as well as the first church, the Congregational Church, that was built in 1825. And it has retained this same pattern throughout its history. And then all the commercial development has been in the circle around. And then as the town got larger, it moved out different spokes of the wheel. Other towns kept the village green in one quadrant of the crossroads and built up their commercial district on all 4 arms of the crossroads. How large the village green was usually depended on, in part, on the expected traffic in the main town building. A town that was the county seat had to accommodate a courthouse as well as the previously mentioned public buildings, and also started to, as I mentioned, retain the war hero monuments. So here you see the clock tower in Hudson at the edge of the park, and then you see the commercial district on all sides of it. This is Chardon in the street across the street from the park. Medina, again, across the street from the Central Park. And Twinsburg, I'm standing in the park. Here's a war memorial over on the left, and you can see all the modern development across the road. Twinsburg is interesting that it hasn't really retained any of its 19th century buildings in the surrounding quadrant. They've all been replaced in the 20th and 21st centuries. By the 1850s, once most Ohio towns had easy access to a railroad depot, the orientation of the downtown center changed. Because most railroad tracks were slightly removed from the exact center of town, buildings to support the railroad commerce were built closer to the tracks. So then you start to see, as in Wellington, this is the initial crossroads with the village park right here. And so the lineup of churches and town hall, another church over here that sort of was a school and a church trading back and forth. But then we see with the rise of, in 1850, of the railroad coming through, we start to see more heavily built buildings along this axis over on this side. So on this side, away from the railroad, these are residences right up against the commercial district. And same with the south. There are residences intermingled in here and in the park, close to the park. But on the sides toward the railroad, this ends up being more shops, like manufacturing shops, as well as commercial areas. There were depots for passengers to buy tickets and wait. This happens to be Wellington's depot. The red building here is the same as this building, same as this building. There were hotels close by for visitors to stay. There were storehouses for goods that were waiting for shipment out, or imported goods waiting to be picked up. And because of the amount of goods available by rail now, as opposed to the slower canal boat previously, the stores in mid-19th century towns were more plentiful and diversified. So here we see, this is a 19th century view or early 20th century view of the cheese warehouse for the Horwarner Cheese Company. And here it is in the 20th century. It's no longer standing, but they had lost the cupola and the dormers, by the time I took this picture. I think I took this in 1981. Here you see the cheese office. This is Depot Street that we're looking at, and then Main Street is contiguous to it, comes in at an angle. And so this Italianate cheese building was the offices for the Warner Cheese Company, one of the biggest commercial enterprises in Wellington in the late 19th century. And here I show you a picture of a cheese box that was also being manufactured locally to box the cheese for export. I also noted this picture along the railroad tracks, the livestock pens of livestock, where people would hold livestock waiting for them to be shipped by rail. Lumber mills and livery stables were essential to accommodate the increase in population. Factories that built goods in greater numbers than needed to serve the small population could now mass produce those goods for the rail market. How a town grew and changed depended on its proximity to the railroad, and it was shaped by its major commercial products. For instance, in the Wellington neighborhood, Huntington is 5 miles to the south, and it was a large center for the dairy farm industry and cheese making and butter making. But when the railroad decided to come through Wellington instead of Huntington, many of the Greek Revival timber frame houses were moved on logs down the road, which is Route 58, and they moved them north into Wellington. The house I grew up in on Main Street, beside Tim Simonson's house, is a Greek Revival that was moved from Huntington because of the railroad. So we see here the picture of the Wellington stables. This big white opening was originally the livery door that went into the stables. This one is an early picture of the Otterbacher harness shop, which is now seen in this building right here. So you can see some of the changes to the first floor, which often happen over time, but has retained its upper floor integrity. And this building looks pretty much unchanged over time. And here we see this is a carriage barn or a carriage maker manufacturer. And this is an old building that used to be town hall and church up in the main square, and they moved it down here around the corner. So this is the axis here is going west. This is the main spoke of town going west, go down West Herrick, and then this is Depot Street. So this building turns the corner, and you see what we're looking at here is the face of it that's already on Depot Street. And then this little Greek Revival house that was the carriage barn was moved to right in here. So it's obviously no longer standing. The buildings that were built in the first phase of development were mostly wooden timber frame construction. So what we see here are, so there's a timber frame house. Here's a timber frame church. Some of these buildings around it though are brick. Here is the lumber company, that's the same carriage barn, carriage maker that we saw moved around the corner. That used to be this building. What had other Greek or mid 19th century wooden frame buildings that eventually got replaced. The churches also were wooden. Fire was the second phase of building used brick or stone for more permanence because fire was such a common problem in the days before electric lights, cook stoves, and central heating. So all of those things helped with the fire hazard. Some of our 19th century photographs, like this one with the American house in the middle of town, show a mixture of both brick and wooden structures. And some of the brick ones were early as well. By the early 1900s, though, the wooden buildings downtown were all replaced with brick in Wellington. Some of the earlier brick buildings were remodeled with a new veneer on the front elevation to look more modern. And there were brick and tile kilns on North Mill Street at the western edge of town, so brick was readily available. Here you see one shot of East Herrick Avenue going, the road going toward Medina. And this building right here has a new face on it and stucco on the side, but that's the same building as right here. And then this building, both of these buildings were part of the Tripp Carriage Factory. And this building was taken down to build this one instead. Here you see another shot of the main village square with the town hall as the centerpiece. And this is the same row I showed you at a different angle before, with a brick hotel at the corner and a couple brick buildings here and a little wooden one. That wooden structure was still there when I grew up in Wellington. So I would guess it came down in the 60s sometime. But this building right here, you can see it was an older brick building that had a new face put on it. And the reason we know that, partly it's because it's an Art Deco style front, but when you go around the corner and look at the side, this is all pit-fired brick. So this is handmade brick, really uneven in size and shape, and decaying. So you can tell it wasn't fired at as high a temperature. So it was probably what was being made locally in town at that point, which I would guess to be first half of the 19th century. So in Wellington, we definitely loved brick, and so did Medina. So we're really fortunate to have two great survivals of towns fairly close to each other. Preservationists love to see, the original layout of town staying intact and most of the buildings being rehabilitated rather than demolished to build more modern structures. Most of the buildings in Wellington and Medina city centers are Victorian styles, especially the Italianate. Italianate style, these are all slides of Wellington just because those are my best examples of Italianate. I've taught architectural history for years, and people always say, why do you have so many pictures of Italianate buildings? And I say, well, because I grew up in Wellington. The Italianate was the predominant style used here in Wellington and popular in the US in the 1860s to the 1890s. So the early version of Italianate was a little bit different from the high Victorian Italianate, but many of the features are still the same. We chose Italianate style for the original school building. You can see before it was demolished, was the McCormick Middle School on South Main, but when it was built, it was the school that housed everybody. So you can see the large eave overhang and the double brackets, the round window hoods with decorative corbelling around the edges of it. The corbel is the buildup of the brickwork at the edges. And then these happen to have keystones, which is a little bit more like Federal style or earlier Georgian style incorporated with it, but just to help be more decorative. And this is the back of this building, but this was a little bit more elaborate with this mansard roof built in the 1870s. So that was the school. They chose that style for the school. And many of the wealthy citizens along Main Street, these are all on South Main Street, these houses, chose different variations of the Italianate style. So again, you see the large cornice up here before the roof line with the double brackets and the large eave overhang. I've been in this third floor, and those windows are lighting the third floor. You can stand up in that. It doesn't look like it because of building scale is so dramatic, but that's like a full story up there, plus the cupola on top. When you try to translate that, the Italianate style though, into commercial buildings, it's a little bit different. We're not using mostly freestanding buildings downtown. We're usually using row buildings or commercial rows. So we see different forms of the Italianate in the commercial building. So we're still getting the rounded window hoods and sometimes an elaboration over the window, like you see down here. A little bit later, Italianate has the window, like a decorative window hood. But here they're mostly in the corbelling along the edges and decorative brickwork at the cornice to help give it that Italianate flair. Here you see in this building beside it, also decorative work underneath the window, but the windows are emphasized by the recess done in brick around to make like a big round arch over each bank of windows. And we also, in many of them, see the large eave overhang with brackets in the corners. Many of the storefronts also still boast decorative columns, usually metal, hollow metal columns that are fluted with Corinthian capitals at the top. So very decorative. And transom windows and double doors are also a common feature of Italianate buildings. The buildings in downtown Wellington sometimes are freestanding, like you see in the ones on the village square. So we're looking at, in this instance, a 19th century photograph of Wellington's town hall with the hotel beside it and some other commercial buildings in the middle. And this one taken last month has the same layout still. The paint is different. You can tell on the town hall. We'll look at the town hall again later. In the middle of town, the main commercial district, we're standing now in that clock tower in the, well, the person who took the photograph for this bird's eye view was standing in the clock tower of the town hall looking down at the main square. So this is the main intersection of town, and the trees begin the village park. So it's on just one quadrant of the village. And you can see some of the commercial rows. They're built by different people, and they're built at different times and in slightly different styles, but they're contiguous. So they still constitute commercial rows, even if they weren't built at the same time. Usually if one building is built all together by the same developer, it's called a commercial block. And so many of these have a little nameplate up in the top of the arch telling us that this is the Benedict block, for example. So here's a photograph from 1991. You can see it hasn't changed much over the last 30 years. This was taken last month with the Verizon store. Also notice that just like with interior domestic architecture and exterior architecture, they're paying more attention to the storefront, even on a corner building where it's in a main commercial area. There's definitely a front to this building as opposed to two fronts. So this side is not nearly as decorative. It's still got the arched bricks over the windows, but it doesn't have the big recessed arch emphasizing that style. I show you some of the old 19th century images or early 20th century images of town compared to the views now to emphasize to you that the town hasn't changed a lot. And that's one of the reasons it's still charming and quaint to us, you know, that people were making conscientious decisions to not rip down buildings, but rather to rehab when they could. This is West Herrick Avenue looking toward the center of town. So the traffic light in town is right here. And so the town hall would be if we made a right here around that corner. And so here we see the cheese office again. And so this is Depot Street. So we're standing on the railroad tracks, looking toward so this is the most heavily used commercial area of town. And right around the corner, this is the same street. These two pictures, the bigger pictures, are the same street, but showing you some of the different businesses in town and how intact the buildings are. Growing up here, I never realized in this block, for instance, that this whole area from this window all the way over was all one commercial block built by one developer, and it just rented out areas to different stores. So now over time that has become, I don't know what their legal status is, but I would guess that they're owned by different owners now. So if you look at the top molding, you can see that this is all built as the same thing. And when it was new, it probably all looked identical up here. And probably the storefronts were very similar to each other too, but over time they have become more unique in character. This building too, you know, it looks like it was built as this building separately, and then there are several buildings to the right of this that were built as one row. The main building at the corner of the east and west, well, so the southwest corner, is the Masonic Building that replaced an earlier building here that was a dry goods store that burned to the ground. So then this was built in the early 20th century. So these two 19th century pictures show so that is the beginning of the same row as this. So there are 1, 2, 3, well, several sections here that were all built together. So here you see the beginning of it with awnings, and here you see the end of it. And it was originally capped by a little bit taller building down here that has since been taken down. So there are some losses in town, but not very many. So if you look beside this at this picture too, you see a residence right there, right up against the commercial district. Here you see another spoke of the quadrant, and this is coming on the north side of town. This is North Main Street, and you see Parsons Dairy here. This is a picture from the 50s, but this building right here is this one, or one section. These two together, the red and the green together are what's white in this building. And then over here, the Spirit of 76 Museum is this tall one right here. And then that's the corner building that we saw in the bird's eye view before. Sorry, I had to shut my door. I have roommates. Here we see East Herrick Avenue, the Wellington Auto Parts, which is, we saw briefly before, we saw the location before where the larger of the Trip Carriage Factories buildings was built. And here we see the other end of that same block. So this is the corner of the main intersection in town. This building, which was the hardware store when I was growing up, is this building in this old turn of the century postcard, which had an Italianate building there. And that building also had a fire in it, but it wasn't completely destroyed. And if you go into the back of this one, this is all newer brick, like a 20th century kind of a brown brick that has a very good solid surface on it. But it is a veneer over top of probably what was this original brick building, because in the back alley behind it, you can see all the soft, old, irregular brick of that building, which I thought was an interesting find, because I had always thought that that building was completely taken down. Also on East Herrick, past the Trip Carriage Factory, is the Wells Building, 1877. Also in the high Victorian Gothic, Gothic/Italianate style, but has, you know, decorative window hoods, the rounded windows, these double windows, even a rounded window in the doorway. And it has retained pretty much its exact character from when it was first built. Right beside it were Greek Revival houses that have since all been taken down for commercial areas. Going further down the street, you see the Tripp House. So it was, you know, just, you know, yards from the carriage factory. And this was raised in around 1970. But to make more commercial space. And here are a couple of the commercial buildings that were built in the 20th century that have replaced that stretch of East Herrick Avenue. Across the street from it was also this old Baptist church that has since been torn down and replaced by low commercial buildings as well. So I didn't want you to get the idea that as beautiful as the downtown Wellington district is, that there had never been anything changed over its history, because that's not true. Part of Wellington's charm is in its preserved commercial district are the original inset doorways that provided cover for the customers and maximized the window display. So I've done a little collage of some of the doorways on, let me see, these are one's North Main and most of the rest of them are West Herrick. But all these larger, and this is South Main on the corner. So the larger buildings tend to have a double recessed doorway. So here's the Spirit of 76 Museum with a double door. Many of them just have the single doorway. Sometimes this is at the corner, so it's just a canted corner. Sometimes they're squared off, and sometimes they're a trapezoidal shape. And they also usually have transom lights above them to help maximize the sunlight in the store, because again, interior lighting was not the best. And I mean, we did have electricity in the 1890s in Wellington. Before that, we had some gas lighting. But again, not everybody had it. And so stores wanted to utilize natural light as much as they could. Another nice survival for a lot of the businesses in the commercial district are the tin ceilings. And so I peeked in and took pictures of a lot of the tin ceilings from the outside, from the windows. You can see that they've been carefully preserved, which is makes a really beautiful interior. Here's a store that happens to be empty right now, so I was able to see most of it. I think this was a men's clothing store when I was growing up, so I'm not really sure what it was used for historically. But you can see the built-in display cabinets and the light all along the edges. This one happens to be the end of a row, so it has lighting on the side and at the back as well as at the front. So this one was really well lit. You can see in this slide, it's beautiful tin ceiling. It's an Italianate building, the Harvey building, with decorative corbelling over Italianate rounded windows. And then here's its beautiful entrance that's been nicely repainted. So hopefully whatever new business goes into this storefront will take as good care of it as has been over the past. I wanted you to see some of the 19th century photographs of interiors of some of the Wellington businesses, so that you can just see what these businesses looked like when they were new. Here's the meat market. Most of the furniture in them, these big bars and display cabinets, were not built in, so they were movable. And if you look at the space, they're all similarly shaped. They're all like a galley space, which is something that today in commercial real estate we're not used to. We're used to big box stores, you know, huge aisles winding on forever and ever. And you know, like, I think security wasn't as much of a problem in these stores because the store owner could see everything in the store and you know, be careful of who was trying to get away out the door with something that they didn't pay for. So we see the meat market, we see a general dry goods store, we see a harness shop down at the bottom, and a men's clothing store. And here are 4 other ones. The Brooks Variety Store, sort of an early Woolworths or 5 and 10 kind of store. We see the first bakery in town, Mr. Robinson's Bakery. We see the hardware store, which is on West Herrick, that eventually became Kimmel's Pharmacy. And when I grew up, Kimmel's Pharmacy was 2 of these stores put together. So I think that happened often, that in the 20th century, somebody wanted a bigger store than just this one galley. So they would cut a door in between 2 of the brick stores and go, you know, sometimes even the floor was uneven, as happened in the Kimmel's Pharmacy store. And on the left here, you see Garrett's Grocery Store. There's a picture online too of the interior of this store, but I thought it was interesting to see, just like we see in New York City, the exterior display of the vegetables and fruits. This building is a nice savior to the commercial district. This is across from the Wellington Town Hall. The Town Hall was an opera house as well as being the civic center. So it drew great audiences in the late 19th century, early 20th century. And so the hotel that was built as a private residence originally, but was only used as a private residence for less than 10 years, became a hotel. And so all of the, you know, famous people who came and performed at the opera house purportedly stayed at this hotel across the street. So the left-hand picture is one that I took last year, but the right-hand, the postcard of the Hotel Royce, which it was called in one of its incarnations. And then the upper right photograph is from 1981. So you can see that the current owner has done some work on the porch to get rid of the metal that was just holding up the original porch roof, and changed the paint to be more accurate to late 19th century. This is a Queen Anne structure to late 19th century paint colors. And the centerpiece of architecture in Wellington has always been, since its insemination in 1885, 86, the Wellington Village Hall. And in the old, these older photograph images, you can see the opera house on the back of it. So we're looking at Civic Center. This is like fire department and police department, the city government. There was a ballroom up here on the 3rd floor. And then this was the big stage and opera house in the back. And then of course the clock tower. Many village greens have a clock tower for people to be able to tell the time in the days before there were any, like not everybody had a clock at home and not everybody had a watch, so that the village hall could help keep time for people. And this photograph is one that I took over Memorial Day. You can see that the back end, the opera house part, has been removed. In the 1950s, they replaced that with a gym floor and roller skating rink because they thought that would be more useful for the modern times. There it is from the front, a conglomeration of styles. It's got some Italianate, some Romanesque revival, some Eastern revivals, like this is Middle Eastern. So is the arch on the main clock tower. This is Queen Anne, the style of windows. So people have said that there are a conglomeration of about 12 styles, but usually in architectural history, we just call it eclectic, and that covers about everything. They had hired a Chicago architect named Oscar Cobb to come and build this building, and he designed several opera houses and large halls like Masonic halls throughout the Midwest. So contrast that with the courthouse in Medina. I don't know what the village hall looks like in Medina because I don't even know where, I know where it is now, the modern one, but I don't know what the historic one looked like. But when a town was a county seat, they generally had a lot more elaborate courthouse buildings on the village square. So this picture is taken standing on the village square during one of their Christmas craft shows or Christmas festivals. I can't remember what we were at. But looking at this, what was essentially an Italianate building with a Second Empire roof put on top, which is usually Second Empire does have a strong Italianate characteristic to it. So the large overhang, the double brackets, the rounded windows, often in pairs, the doors in pairs. But the coining on the corners is more Second Empire. The mansard roof, definitely Second Empire. And then the huge clock tower that's similar to the one in Wellington stands as, an official landmark, I guess, in the middle of the town. It has the similar square of surviving Italianate buildings along the edges of that middle village square. So here you see some of those buildings. Nice survival really on all four sides of the square in Medina. Here you see a shot of blurry shot, but of the gazebo looking across the park at one of the rows of commercial buildings. So all different styles, and these have begun to be painted in different colors too. Wellington has kept most of its brick as original brick, which is actually healthier for the brick. But as the brick begins to deteriorate, I guess it doesn't hurt to put paint on it as long as you keep the paint up. And so they end up, with these marvelous different varying colors to make it look a lot more inviting. So I'm going to show you some of the Italianate downtowns in various parts of the Western Reserve too. We'll go through these fairly quickly, but this is in Manaway, Ohio, which is in Portage County, an old feed and grain store. So this was built as all one commercial block. You can see the Italianate trim at the first floor, and the core building in the brickwork above it, and then the grain tower behind it. And this is right along the railroad line, built on a side street. And you can see that there's a shadow here of an earlier lower building that was next to it, probably a Greek Revival building, which often happened, you know, that some of the sturdier buildings last and some of the other ones, the weaker buildings, do not. And then across the street from it is the livery stable with its beautiful high Victorian Italianate trim on it. There are the livery doors. Just around the corner is the train depot with its beautiful brackets on it. So if you can make a train depot into Italianate, this is a good example of that. And then beside that, a commercial block also that's done in the Italianate style. Hudson, we've looked at before, originally had all of its commercial buildings as gable front Greek Revival buildings facing the square on two sides. And they had a big fire. And so we see some of these recreations in wood across from it that are now eaveside toward the street, but then the rest of it was rebuilt in brick so that it had better survival. And so some of that is Italianate, some of it's a little bit later Art Deco. Some of these gable-fronted buildings, though, that survived got refaced. So here you see an Italianate front put on an old Greek Revival store. And it had its recessed doorway put in also to match the Italianate style. This is a 19th century photograph and an engraving of the businesses in Ravenna, which is also a county seat. And this is the commercial row right across from the courthouse. And you can see the signage on here. They were painting their sign, the owner signs, and what goods they sold in there right on the fronts of the buildings. This is Norwalk, also a county seat. Here's the county courthouse, which is a little bit later Beaux-Arts style. It's interesting in Norwalk that a lot of the public buildings around the square retain their federal and Greek Revival style, but then the larger commercial buildings also are mostly in the Italianate style. This is my one picture to show you that's not in the Western Reserve. This is Wellington, Ohio, in Clinton County, but a beautiful commercial building that was done in the late Victorian Italianate style with the oriel windows on either end of it. And you can see that some of these, this looks like it was probably Italianate too, but has been modernized with a resurface on it. So sometimes it's harder to see that it was originally Italianate. These two at the bottom are Painesville, Ohio, up in Lake County. So it also has some of its early Greek Revival buildings, but has most of its commercial blocks done in the Italianate style. Chardon in Geauga County. Hi.
Hi. I don't want to totally cut you off, but we are getting very close to an hour, and I just wanted to make a quick mention before you finish up that if anyone has any questions for Christie, please type them into the chat box now, and I'll read those to you. So if you have questions, type them in the chat box, and I'll let you finish up, Christie. Thank you.
Thank you. This is Chardon, the Geauga County seat, and so it's got this beautiful Italianate courthouse in one end of the village square, and then across from it are the commercial rows that are also in the Italianate style. Here you see some of the details. So the storefronts are the same as what Wellington was doing, you know, with the the trapezoidal recessed store here with the double doors. And you can see what some villages have done, or individual business owners have done to modernize, so here you see, a color combination that's a little bit more modern than the old, brick color. But here they've put in modern windows instead of the big plate glass windows. So on one side it's got modern windows, and one side it continues to have the plate glass. It probably depends. This is a law office, so it probably depends on what the usage is going to be. If they need goods that need to be displayed in the windows, then you want to maximize the window space. Here you see an Italianate building on the corner that's now an antique store. It has a double opening so that the traffic goes through. And this was, I think, originally this way. The traffic goes through both an indoor and an outdoor, or now one of them's closed, but so it has a consistent storefront with all of the display windows. And here you can see the same brick and the corbelling and the keystones above the windows. Warren is a little bit bigger of a town, runs along the Mahoning River, so couldn't expand in that direction. Built this huge courthouse at the end of the 19th century in the Romanesque revival style, which takes up most of the city park. And I suspect that this was originally the middle of the middle of the village green with a smaller wooden courthouse on it. And because this is so massive, they ended up foregoing their village green, and so now have kind of moved around the corner and used some of the area along the river, so where some of the old houses were, to be their city park now. So they've built they've sort of shifted their village green to a modern location. Because it's a bigger city, you see all kinds of architecture flanking the whole county seat square. So very different vibe than you would see in a smaller town. There are still some areas around it that have earlier architecture. So, late Victorian, sort of Italianate style buildings around it, but not nearly as old or as consistent of a character as what we saw in Wellington and Medina. And then the last thing I wanted to show you was some scenes from Cleveland. This is one of the oldest areas of surviving downtown buildings in Cleveland. This is around the West 3rd to West 6th neighborhood before you go down the hill into the flats. So away from the village square, the city square has changed a lot. It's still in the same location, but has been modernized many times over the years. But some of these Italianate buildings still survive in this particular area in the warehouse district on a little bit larger scale than what we're looking at. As you can see, Wellington holds a prominent place in the preserved architecture of Ohio's 19th century. Today, we only focused on the commercial district of the town and the development of the town center. But there are many beautiful homes still existing from the Greek Revival and Gothic periods, Italianate, Queen Anne, and other Victorian styles that complement this downtown area. And I hope that this community is able to support the continued protection of this important architectural and historic place. I am happy to take any questions.
I do have one question typed for you, Christie. William says, I noticed an exceptionally large arched nameplate area at the cornice of one of the commercial Italianate building pictures in Wellington. I noticed a similar extra large arched feature in a commercial building in Milan. What is the precedent for this style of feature?
Is she saying Milan, like Italy, or Milan, Ohio?
I assumed Milan, Italy. Let me see. Oh, I don't know. Milan. William, are you still on?
Oh, it's he, sorry.
Yes. Milan, Ohio. Milan, Ohio.
Milan, Ohio.
Sorry.
I mean, I'm a furniture person, actually, by training. So my guess is that it was the same during the Renaissance revival period. They were doing like a big round arch, sort of a half of an oval above buildings or above furniture as a focal, to make it a focal point. And so sometimes there would be things carved in that in furniture, or they would put burled wood on it to make it just more dramatic. So it seemed like an obvious, for the Italianate, it seemed like an obvious way to be able to put the name of the building and the building owner up there. I mean, this is the beginning of like the naming, you know, like when in colleges, every different building is named after some donor. This is the beginning of that kind of idea where I bought this building, I paid for this building to be built as a service to the public, so I'm going to put my name on it. So, I mean, but I don't think it has any other precedent other than it's just part of the Renaissance and Italianate revivals.
Well, all I'm seeing now are lots of compliments. Christie, you did a great job. Beautiful buildings. Thanks so much for sharing so many photos. I think sometimes we lack in the amount of photos that we get to see when we're talking about all these buildings. So thanks so much for doing that. Does anyone have any other questions quick? Know that this session will be recorded. I did put the link to our YouTube channel in the chat box. Gonna put it there one more time for you. You can find us on YouTube. If you search Heritage Ohio, you'll see this recording and many more. So make sure to take a look there. Go to our website, heritageohio.org. Glad the mower stopped. Hope that wasn't being too loud. Go to heritageohio.org. You can join Heritage Ohio and become a dues-paying member there. Please do that. And make sure to sign up for our regular weekly e-blasts. You'll get notifications of these kinds of sessions, as well as our, hopefully soon, in-person trainings. So Christie, thank you so much for your time today and for putting together such a beautiful presentation. We really appreciate it. And thanks to everyone who joined us today. Appreciate your time.
You're welcome. It was nice to see all these faces.
Yes. Thanks so much, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.